Hello again. Whenever people talk about the sheer weirdness of the modern Western world, somebody's sure to bring up the idea of the boiling frog. The idea being that if you place a frog in cold water and then very gradually increase the temperature by small amounts each time, then the creature will adapt and not notice that it is being boiled alive. So it is with our society. There are small changes every so often which, in the course of time, add up to enormous differences from one decade to the next. Take the idea of men, that is to say biological males, competing against women in sporting events. This has always happened on the sly throughout the 20th century and has been regarded as pretty outrageous. Cheating, in fact. Obviously, men tend to be taller, heavier and stronger than women, and so it's hardly fair for them to compete in athletics and team sports against women. Often this kind of thing has happened as nations try to boost their prestige by winning events at the Olympic Games. In the 1936 Berlin Olympics, for instance, a man called Heinrich, although styling himself Dora at the time, was a member of the German team in the women's high jump event. A few years later, he gained the women's record for the high jump, a triumph for Nazi Germany, and a record for the women's high jump which lasted until 1957, when the supposed Dora was found working in Germany as Heinrich, a man. It was the Russians and their satellites in Eastern Europe who took this kind of thing to another level, though. This was part of the Cold War, in which the Russians and their allies fought desperately for any slight psychological advantage over America and NATO, and the sporting field was one arena for such triumphs. Older viewers will remember East German shot putters, who were supposedly women, as well as various Czechs, Romanians and Russians. This is how the USSR and their allies maintained such a grip on the sporting world in the 1960s. There was too the use of puberty blockers on promising young female athletes, in the days before anybody had ever heard of puberty blockers, of course. Some 18-year-old gymnasts from behind the Iron Curtain, who performed wonders on the parallel bars in the 1970s, still had the bodies of 12-year-olds because the onset of their puberty had been artificially delayed. All this was regarded as cheating, just like entering men for the female javelin or shot put. It was for this reason that so-called sex tests were brought in at international sporting events. The Commonwealth Games in 1966 involved sex tests. At first, this just entailed a cursory inspection between the legs of the supposed women, but later genetic tests were conducted to ensure that all those entering as women actually had XX chromosomes. Fun fact, at the Montreal Olympics in 1976, Princess Anne was the only female competitor who was exempted from having a sex test. A couple of decades ago, everybody in the Western world acknowledged that for men to enter women's sporting activities was wrong and very unfair. Consider the situation now, where even suggesting such a thing lays one open to the very modern accusation of transphobia. From being the common sense view of fairness, the idea that only women should be able to compete in women's sport has become something which is liable to brand a person as belonging to, or at least sympathising with, the far right. This is an example of the boiling frog in action. Month by month, and year by year, we have been introduced to ideas like puberty blockers, which were once associated with cheating in Olympic gymnastics, and also persuaded that men can actually become women if they want to enough, and perhaps wish upon a star. It then follows that having become women in their own imagination, It is very wrong of the rest of us to try and maintain fairness and integrity in women's sport by suggesting that those born with penises should not perhaps be allowed to enter athletics competitions or team sports in which only women are involved. Common sense has thus been transformed into intolerance and prejudice. By the by, going off the slight tangent, I must remark that during my involuntary absence from YouTube, I actually acquired more new subscribers in a week of not posting than I usually get when I am posting away like a madman. At the beginning of the week's suspension, I had just over 206,000 subscribers, and when it ended, I was well over 207,000. Pleasant as this is, it makes me wonder what, if anything, it says about my posts. If I gain more subscribers when I keep my mouth shut for a week than I do when I am speaking 3 times a day about my various views and opinions, perhaps I'm actually inhibiting the growth of this channel when I open my mouth. This is a sobering thought.